Thank you for the chance to have a chat about Blue Shield Australia. I'm Catherine Dan. I'm currently the chair of the Blue Shield Australia Committee, and also on the line we have Catherine Robinson, who is also an archivist who is on our Blue Shield Committee. I would like to firstly acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of the Canberra region of Australia, and that I'm speaking and acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging, and that I'm speaking to you from the lands that they have cared for millennia. So today I'm just going to talk about Blue Shield Australia, a little bit about how and when we started, what our main preoccupations are and what sorts of activities we undertake. So, is my slide going to move? Is the next question. Yes, just have to find the right button. So what I'm going to cover is a little bit of an overview. So the development of Blue Shield in Australia and the current membership. I want to give a bit of a picture of the Australian context, because I think that's important for the kinds of activities that we have undertaken over the years, and a little bit about current issues for us. So, as you know, Blue Shield was founded with 4 pillar organisations representing various sectors for cultural heritage. So for archives, the International Council on Archives; for libraries, the International Federation of Library Associations; ICOM, the International Council of Museums for the museum sector; and ICOMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites. So in Australia, all of those 4 pillars are represented by particular local associations. So ICOMOS, it's Australia ICOMOS; ICOM, it's ICOM Australia. Libraries are represented by the Australian Library and Information Association, which has membership across individual professionals and corporate organisations as well. And the Australian Society of Archivists, which is a professional body for, again, individual archivists, but also has membership from organisations, corporate bodies. The archive sector actually started out with CARA, which is the Council of Australasian Archives and Records Authority. So essentially the government archives as the rep of ICA, but we transitioned a few years ago to the professional body as representing beyond government as well. But Catherine and I, as the archives reps on Blue Shield, meet reasonably regularly, are invited to provide information to and report to the CARA organisations. So that's how we maintain that sort of relationship across the sector. So that's the representation of the 4 pillars, but we have a number of what are called associate members. So this is really, I think, critical and important in broadening the types of representative bodies for the various sectors. You'll see there AMAGA, which is museums and galleries. So that sort of crosses over a little bit with museums, but goes a bit further into the sort of art gallery space. The Federation of Australian Historical Societies gives us some reach into local history organisations, which is very useful. PABICA is the Pacific regional branch for the International Council on Archives. So there has been exchange of information with the Pacific over the years. And AICCM is the professional body for conservators in this country. And I think that's a really critical component of our membership, because of the sets of skills that conservators bring and the importance when we're dealing with, particularly disaster situations in this country. We meet so we have a committee membership of, fluctuates a little bit, sort of around 8 to 10. We meet online every couple of months, and we have a rotating secretariat and chair. So every couple of years that moves from one sector organisation to another, which sometimes can be a challenge with continuity and keeping things going, but I think there's been a reasonably stable membership for a few years that helps with that. So that's kind of the and we come under Blue Shield governance, and we do all the normal sorts of things that you would expect in running a committee. I wanted to give a bit of context for the way that Blue Shield operates in Australia, and I guess the first thing I want to start with is what cultural property or cultural heritage is in this country. So Australia has a very deep history. Culture has existed in this country for more than 60,000 years through our Indigenous peoples. That's something that I think, as colonists, we have only, recognised and started to deal with in fairly recent times. So colonial cultural heritage is less than 250 years old, essentially European, but we also have quite a rich number of migrant cultures who are also relatively recent as inhabitants of this country, but bring cultural past with them from a place of origin, which could be anywhere in the world. The second part, I suppose, about our Australian context is our geographical situation and the nature of the country. So I've put there some words from a very famous Australian poem by Dorothea McKellar, I Love a Sunburnt Country, which often gets referenced because of those lines of droughts and flooding rains. And it is true. We're very much dominated by our climate and environment. So we're a large country that has from tropical to arid environments. We regularly have droughts and floods. We regularly have bushfires. So that certainly colours the way that we think of and deal with cultural heritage. It's just a map of Australia, but it does give you, but it is a large country. I mean, that's kind of Europe kind of fits just across the middle there. So I just wanted to indicate that, we go from Central Australia, which is desert country, to far north Queensland, which is tropical. And in all those situations, we're dealing with different preservation issues in relation to cultural material. So, from mould to very dry environments where, from the archives perspective, we're ending up dealing with very brittle paper and all those sorts of things. So just part of the context. So this is a quote from, we recently, 2020, had a Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements. This followed a number of natural disasters at that point in time. And this was one of the things that I think, it summarises what I'm saying about our context. Our climate, with temperature and rainfall fluctuating from season to season and year to year, means that we go from heat waves and droughts to cool, wet conditions, which can bring floods. We are currently we're told that we're going into the third year of an El Niño, which means that the flooding that's occurred over the last 2 years will continue into the next few years. there's a variety of types of disasters and they follow one on another. Not wanting to labour the point, but this is, again, from the same report, a chart about insurance losses over a 10-year period. So I guess there are two things from this. One, and it's very much the financial rather than the cultural property, but it's an indicator. Over a 10-year period, there's probably not been a year where there hasn't been a natural hazard of some sort causing damage. I can look at this and see in the bar charts where there was a massive hailstorm that came across Canberra, and I work at the Australian National University. Something like 90% of our buildings had roof damage, and 2 years on, there are still many roofs across Canberra that are across the cultural institutions, because the hailstorm cut a swathe across where the cultural institutions happen to be located, and roofs are still being fixed. The National Library of Australia has just closed access to some of its collections because they need to move them because of work being done on the roof. So this is about insurance, but it does indicate the sorts of impacts that might come for cultural property. So that's our context. So you would understand that we certainly look to the legislative underpinnings for Blue Shield, but a lot of our activity, rather than looking to conflict situations, tends to look towards disaster preparedness in the broad, but with an eye to some of the environmental types of hazards that exist. So the sorts of things that we are keen to do and the sorts of activities that we focus on, like most Blue Shield committees, I think, are about raising awareness and promoting the sort of the principles, the Blue Shield approach, and so on. So we do this through information resources, through promotion of preparedness and risk assessment. We also make submissions to inquiries. That report is, usually there is some sort of reflection after disaster, but there have also been other, usually government inquiries, where we have found a place to have a voice. Movable cultural heritage, which is legislation about transportation of cultural heritage in and out of the country, is one area where we've voiced our views. And recently there's been a call for submissions for a new cultural policy. And so we and other organisations and members made submissions to that, and advocacy. So just a little bit of a picture of some of those things that we do. A website and social media is, of course, the way that many of us communicate about the sorts of things that we're trying to do. We see this as a place that we promote material often created by our member organisations or bodies such as cultural institutions across the country. And so we build on their work by making sure that we link to the resources that people might need to use. And in a moment of disaster, we will point people to this sort of thing. We then also run activities that kind of build on that or promote the sorts of material that we have. So a couple of examples. We have settled on using International Disaster Risk Reduction Day as a focus for promotional work. That day is on the 13th of October, which ties in really well for Australia in it's usually just before our disaster season. So it's either at the time where the fire authorities are talking about preparation for bushfire. We know the storm season is coming, the cyclone season is coming. So it's a point where we can remind people, make sure that you have your risk planning up to date, that you have all your networks in place, that you're ready should something happen so that you can protect material. A couple of years ago, we ran a competition encouraging people to take photos of their disaster recovery bin and post it on social media. The idea was to encourage people to actually think about having a disaster recovery bin. Many people have them in large wheelie rubbish bins. This happens to be the one that we have in the ANU archives, you know, bucket and mop, gloves, all those sorts of things. But, you know, we ran a competition where people actually won the contents of a disaster recovery bin. The other image is associated with a seminar that we held, but actually was about the signing of cooperative letter of intent between a number of organisations in the region where I work. We are this year, for Disaster Risk Reduction Day, facilitating several meetings in regions to try and encourage organisations, individuals who deal with cultural property collections to just get together and make sure that they have a really strong network prior to any problems. So it's a very simple idea. Just make sure you have your network in place before you need it. And partly this comes out of sort of, you know, realising that in recent situations, that hasn't always been the case. Again, we promote information resources which might not be created solely by Blue Shield as Blue Shield, but we sponsor or we facilitate or we assist. This is just a snip of part of a full-year calendar that the Association of Conservators has put together to remind people about preparing, about doing disaster planning, about risk assessment, and we provided some assistance to them to actually put that together, produce it, have it published last year, and they will be doing one for this year as well. And we see this as a really good tool to get out to local communities, small organisations, to tell a very simple story about assessing your risk and being prepared. Workshops and training sessions is another area where over the years since we started as a committee, we've done a variety of things. I guess it's always on the agenda and it just depends how much resource we have at any one time to assist with this. So for one, maybe 2 years, we managed to achieve some grant funding to help run some workshops. We haven't, that sort of grant funding hasn't been around for a few years, but through sort of membership fees, we then feed them back into sponsoring and assisting workshops. And I mentioned earlier that we make submissions where we see an opportunity to make submissions. The one on the right there is about movable cultural heritage, which was reviewed in 2015, and they did make some changes, but not all of the changes that were recommended by the report. So that one's sort of still on our agenda, and we still mention that, you know, Movable Cultural Heritage Act could be improved whenever the opportunity arises. And we haven't done very much in the area of research, and increasingly there are, you know, tertiary institutions and so on who are looking at climate change and its impact, which is really useful for us. But as a sort of follow-up to a burst of activity, so, you know, a bushfire period, floods, we will gather information where we can from our members and member institutions in order to analyse, well, what was the impact from the perspective of cultural property, cultural heritage. We've done a little bit of that. You know, there's undoubtedly potential to do more, but it's just how much, you know, where do you devote the resources at any one time? But an area that we are keen to advance, and I know Peter will know that Australia got to a very good state a few years ago, and then probably, I don't know, we didn't quite follow through in the way that we thought we were going to. But it is back on our agenda, and we're very keen to kind of pick this up, is advocacy for the protocols to the 1954 Hague Convention. So, you know, Australia has signed up to the convention, that's fine, but we see it as really important that we move forward with ratification of the first and second protocols, because they give a stronger sort of legislative base, they give us an opportunity to do more, and I think it will just raise awareness and understanding of the Blue Shield objectives in a way that we don't see as being pervasive at the moment. So there have been a number of roundtables, and I think 2018 was a point where a number of people had brought together various government departments. There was no major impediment, but there was not a will to move forward. It kind of needs some political impetus. We have had a change of government. It's possible that this government may be more interested. I mean, they have certainly called for submissions to cultural policy, so that's a sign that, you know, this is something that they may be thinking about. So we've sort of recommenced some of that understanding of where we were up to and advocacy for adoption of the protocol. So that will be a bit of a focus over the next year. And I guess that's where our current issues are: needing to adopt the protocols and therefore engage more broadly, and to continue with information exchange to see if there are new opportunities in the sort of disasters relating to cultural property. There have been more organisations formed, usually at a government level, about disaster risk assessment and response agencies and resilience agencies. And so there are probably some opportunities there to make them aware of Blue Shield and to insert in their thinking some of the things that we're concerned about. They're just our contact points. And that's all that I wanted to cover, but very happy to answer questions.